Any good piece of music, a good instrumental piece, is good because of the melodies and the contrast between various tones. But a great piece of music is also great because of the dynamics in the piece. There'll be times where it's very, very soft, and you're kind of drawn in, and then the trumpets blare, and you just feel the excitement of the music. You see that also with a good book, don't you? A good book, you're reading along, and a good book is one that has plot twists and things that happen that kind of pull you in. And at times, you're kind of being set up, and then some plot shift comes, and you're all befuddled, and you're drawn deeper into it. And then you reach the climax of the book, and you know what the climax of the book is. That's when you can't put it down. You know you should go to bed, but you can't because you have to find out what happened. The Bible is filled with all kinds of dynamic stories, isn't it? I mean, we've got the story of the guy who's on a boat with his family while the rest of the world is flooded. The story of Moses who raises this stick and the Red Sea parts and all of Israel walks across it. He raises the stick again, and then all the Egyptians are buried in the water. We read the great story of this little kid who takes on a giant and wins by throwing one stone and hitting him in just the right spot. We read the story of a prophet who really didn't want to go where God wanted him to go, and so he ran in the other direction, and God had him thrown in the ocean where he was swallowed by a fish and then vomited up, and the guy had a change of heart and decided that maybe he'd go where God wanted him to go. We've got the story of Job, who was this rich, righteous man, and he loses everything. And his reward was a personal audience with the Almighty. Powerful stories. You get to the New Testament, and it gets just as good. We read about the birth of Jesus, and there's the angels that are singing. The angel appears to Mary. The angel appears to Joseph. The shepherds see the heavenly host. The wise men follow this star. Herod wants to try to wipe out this new king, and so he kills all the babies in Bethlehem. That's pretty dramatic stuff. Throughout the course of Jesus' life, he does these great miracles, and everybody's pumped up, and they go, wow, what about Jesus? And even his death, think about the drama of that. The march into Jerusalem on Palm Sunday, and then the sudden plot shift where the crowd that was cheering Hosanna now is cheering, crucify him. How he's beaten and hangs on this cross, and darkness comes upon the land in the middle of the day. And then the earthquake takes place. And even the Roman guards are now convinced that this guy was somebody different. He was special. He truly was the Son of God. The curtain in the temple rips as a way of saying that the access to God has now been made open and clear so that everybody can go in and out of his presence because of what Jesus has done. Now, with all of that, we're a little surprised at the resurrection story, aren't we? You would have thought that it would have been much more dramatic than it actually is. I mean, there's an earthquake, but we don't know when it took place. There are a couple of angels that appear, but other than that, it's kind of quiet. I was reading Frederick Buechner's book, Secrets in the Dark, and this is what he wrote, and it really had an impact on me. He writes, "It has always struck me as remarkable that when the writers of the four Gospels come to the most important part of the story they have to tell, they tell it in whispers. The part I mean, of course, is the part about the resurrection. The Jesus who was dead is not dead anymore. He is risen. He's here. According to the Gospels, there was no choir of angels to proclaim it. The way the Gospel writers tell it, in other words, Jesus came back from death not in a blaze of glory, but more like a candle flame in the dark, flickering first in this place, then in that place, then in no place at all. If they'd been making the whole thing up for the purpose of converting the world, presumably they would have described it more the way the book of Revelation describes how he will come back again at the end of time, with the armies of heaven arrayed in fine linen, white and pure, and his eyes like a flame of fire, and on his head many diadems. But that's not the way the Gospels tell it, because they are not trying to describe it as convincingly as they can. They are trying to describe it as truthfully as they can. It was the most extraordinary thing they believed had ever happened, and yet they tell it so quietly that you have to lean close to be sure what they are telling. They tell it as softly as a secret, as something so precious and holy and fragile and unbelievable and true that to tell it any other way would be somehow to dishonor it. To proclaim the resurrection the way they do, you would have to say it in whispers. Christ is risen. Like that. Pretty powerful, isn't it? I mean, think about resurrection morning. When Jesus died, there was kind of this crisis because he died on the day before the Sabbath. And the Sabbath starts at 6 p.m. And we know that Jesus died probably around 3 p.m. And so there's just 3 hours, but Joseph and Nicodemus had to request the body, and then that request needed to be taken to Pilate, and then Pilate needed to send somebody to verify that Jesus really was dead, and then that person had to come back, and then Joseph and Nicodemus had to come. So time is a waste in here. The clock's running down. And so there were no long lines of mourners. There was no packed funeral for Jesus. It was just a hurried burial. They take him off the cross, they hurry him to the tomb, they quickly wrap him up in the spices that were kind of the equivalent of our modern embalming, and then they have to close the cave door with this big rock, and that's it. The story's over, we thought. Now on Sunday morning, the ladies who, well, let's just be honest, I'm sure that the women knew that the guys had done their best job. They did their best in preparing Jesus, but they're guys, and guys never do it right. You know, guys are going to take shortcuts. That's just who we are. Come on, it's good enough is kind of our motto. And these women wanted to do it right, so they came early that morning as the sun was rising. We're told about the earthquake, but we don't know whether the women felt the earthquake, whether they thought anything of it, or whether it was while they were sleeping. We don't know. They worried, they wondered, how are we going to move the stone? I don't know if they knew that the guard was there. Maybe they did, maybe they didn't. And as they get there, they see the stone open and the guard's gone. And their first response is not to say, hey, I think Jesus is risen. I'm sure they began to cry and said, what more humiliation could happen? Now somebody's stolen his body. Somebody has vandalized his grave. Can't they leave us alone? And as they're crying, these angels appear to them. And don't you love this? The angels say to them, why are you looking for Jesus here? Oh, duh, this is where we buried him. Don't look for him here. He's risen. Just as he said, now you guys go tell the disciples that Jesus is alive. I don't know about you, but if an angel tells me to do something, I'm inclined to do it. So they head back to wherever it was that the disciples were staying. They could have been in Jerusalem. They may have been in Bethany, where they were probably staying with Mary and Martha and Lazarus. But anyhow, they head back there. So it's a journey. So they rush back there. And you can tell they get into the room and you're not going to believe this. We saw these angels. And they said Jesus is not in the tomb because he's alive. He's come back from the dead. And the disciples' response was, yeah, right. I'm sure they felt that this was a traumatic effect of the death of Jesus, that these women were going nuts. But there must have been something to them that was compelling enough to make Peter and John say, you know, maybe we ought to just check this out. So Peter and John get up, and we're told they run to the tomb. Mary follows them. But Mary now has gone to the tomb. She's come back to the disciples. Now she's going back to the tomb. I'm pretty sure she ain't running. And so she heads back to the tomb. Peter and John get there. They go in. They see that Jesus isn't there, but they see that the wrappings, and we don't know whether he was wrapped kind of like a mummy or whether he was wrapped with a long cloth, but the idea here is that the wrappings are there. It's just that the body's gone. You know. And the thing that was over his face is all folded up and put on the table. That's weird, they said. And we're told that they were confused. They didn't know what happened. This isn't normal. If they had stolen Jesus, that would have taken the whole thing, wouldn't they? And so they head back to the disciples, maybe scratching their head. And I don't know if they passed Mary on the way or what happened. So Mary finally gets there. Peter and John have already left. They've gone back to talk to the disciples. And Mary's crying. What a lousy day this is. She's crying. She's torn up. All the anguish of these last few days now seems to be coming out. And I imagine she's just sobbing. And then she senses somebody behind her. And she turns around. She can't really tell. Maybe the person had their hood up real high and you couldn't really see their face. Or maybe it was because she was crying and so her eyes were all fuzzy from the water. Or maybe it was just early in the morning and she couldn't see very clearly. But she assumes that this person's the gardener and says, "Can you tell me who took his body? Tell me where you put him." And all he has to say is one word: Mary. And it's like a light switch. She goes from grief to incredible joy and falls to her knees and grabs onto Jesus. And Jesus says, "Mary, I'm not going anywhere. You're going to have to hold on to me. I'm not ascending to the Father yet. Go, tell the disciples I'm back and I'll meet them soon." Wow. Pretty cool story. So Mary goes back and she says, "Okay, now I know you guys didn't believe me the first time, but this time I saw Jesus." That night they're all gathered together in a house and we're told that the doors are locked and all of a sudden Jesus appeared and we go, "How did he get in?" Don't know. But he's there. And again, the disciples who were moping around, who were afraid, who were terrified that something bad was going to happen to them too because they were known associates of Jesus who had just been executed for being a criminal, now they see Jesus and their life has changed. The only thing I can think of, it must have been similar to like when you're having a baby. Because I'm way out of my league here. But I can only imagine that for a woman, you go through that time where first of all, it's scary. Things are happening to your body and you think you're going to die. And it's awful. You just want it over. You hate your husband. All that stuff that's going on. And you're screaming at people. Some people do that. Other people are pretty cool about it. But it's not a pleasant experience. And finally, you just get this thing out of me. People have said that. And then all of a sudden, you hear a cry. And a baby's placed on your chest. And that terror and that fear and that exhaustion is replaced by unimaginable and unmeasurable joy. That must have been what it was like that night. They went from saying, "What in the world is going on here? We can't explain this," to, "Wow, it's Jesus." And he shows them his hands. He shows them his feet. They see the nail prints. He shows them his side. And then to make sure that they know he's not a ghost, he says, "Do you have anything to eat?" And he eats some fish. I would have picked a steak, but he eats fish because that's probably what was on the buffet. I don't know. And so they're convinced. And over the course of the next 40 days, they spend time with Jesus off and on. And they get the chance to talk to him and probe his mind and say, "Explain this to us." And he does. And we're told that he sees over 500 people at various times. And then eventually they see him ascend to heaven, and they know he's going to come back because he promised. Now that still begs the question, why does God do it this way? I mean, why not horses and chariots and trumpets and all this stuff? Wouldn't it have been cool for Jesus to stand on the temple steps in Jerusalem, surrounded by a host of angels, and said, "So you thought I wasn't the Son of God, huh?" Or have him appear in the sky. I mean, wouldn't that have been cool? The whole world would have seen. The whole world would have believed. The whole world would have followed him. Why do it so quietly? Well, I've got two suggestions. Number one is that it was a holy moment. Now, the resurrection proves some really cool things. 4 things that I come up with. One, that Jesus really is God. I mean, the resurrection shows that. Jesus is God. Nobody else has ever come back from the dead. All the other religious leaders are still in the grave. Okay? Jesus is the only one who has risen from the dead. Second, it shows us that he gave his life for us, that he actually did what apparently he said he was going to do. He said he was going to give his life as a sacrifice for our sins. Not only did he do that, but apparently that sacrifice must have been satisfactory to God. Otherwise, he wouldn't have brought him back from the dead. Third, it shows us that there is life beyond the grave. We don't have to worry about it anymore. Do you think there's more than this life? I know there is, because Jesus came back. He was there. He came back to tell us about it. He told us that there's life beyond the grave. So yes, there's life beyond the grave. And fourth, it means that the hope that we have is not something that's made up in order to make us feel better. It's not something that is designed to help soothe our bruised hearts in time of grief. It is real, and it's anchored to the work of Jesus. So what makes this such a holy moment? It's because of what happened. I remember back between my sophomore and junior years at college, I went with a college choir to Europe, and we were there for a month. And one day in Germany, we were in Cologne, Germany, and there was this massive cathedral. Huge, huge cathedral, very ornate. It was an incredible place. And so the whole choir went into this place. And this was a cavernous sanctuary, huge ceilings. And you just walked in and you went, I mean, for a second, you just couldn't breathe. There was a part of us, that wondered, boy, I bet it really echoes in here. And the kid inside of us says, I want to just shout and see how much it echoes, but nobody had to tell us to behave. It was a holy place. The architects had created it in such a way that when you walked in, you felt you were in the presence of God. And the only appropriate response at those times is to be silent. Because you know that anything you say is going to come out stupid. Now, we did sing a song, and it was one of the most moving experiences of my life, as we sang the Lord's Prayer very quietly in the sanctuary. And I think the resurrection is kind of like that. That if we understand what it is, if we get it, we're led not to shout and scream. We're led to worship. We're led to be still and to marvel at the love and the wisdom and the compassion and the mercy and the grace of God. Yes, there's lots to celebrate, but if we really get it, we need to be still, to reflect, to feel that love. And if you're like me, even as we sing songs today, the tears well up in your eyes as you think, how could this be true? How could God love us this much? So I think it was quiet because it was a holy moment. It's the time when God opens his hands and says, come home. I want to give you forgiveness. I want to give you life. Come home. It's a holy moment. But second, I think God is calling us to facts, not to an event. He wants us to get the fact that this is a wonderful thing, but it's a real thing. It's not just some event. People do lots of weird things when, it's a moving event. Think about New Year's Eve in Times Square. Never been there, but you watch all the pictures and you see that crystal ball. Isn't it dumb that they spend all that money on that thing? But anyhow, you see this ball come down and a new year has begun. And when it says, 3, 2, 1, Happy New Year, everybody kisses people. Even people you don't even know, I guess. And you turn to somebody, you don't have anybody to kiss, so you just kiss the lady next to you. Now, any other time, you'd be arrested, you'd be slugged, bad things would happen to you. But because it's New Year's Eve, everybody goes, okay, it's New Year's, you got to kiss somebody. If you're out to eat at Valentine's Day with your girlfriend, say you're 16, you're on your first date, and you see somebody at another table, and the guy proposes to the woman, and it's moving. And even at 16, you're thinking, oh, I should do that. I should propose right here now because it's Valentine's Day. That's so cool. I want to be a part of that. It'd be dumb, but you feel like you want to do that, don't you? And there are times like that happen to us. Even think about Pearl Harbor and 9/11, horrible events. But as soon as they happened, people started heading to the enlistment bureau, saying, I'm signing up. I'm going to be a part of this. I'm going to fight back. Events provoke responses that are sometimes not thought out. Happens in the church. We have some emotional event, and we make this appeal, and people respond because they're responding to the event. I don't know if you remember, it wasn't that many years ago, but we had a group of really big guys, bodybuilders called Team Impact, come into town. And these guys were amazing athletes, huge guys, and boy, could they eat. Oh my gosh, could they eat. But they were passionate for the things of God. They had a deep theological faith. And so we had all these people in the gym, lots and lots of people were there, watching these guys do incredible things. And when it was over, one of the guys got up and he shared his testimony and shared what Christ had done for him. And it was very, very moving and powerful. And he said, if you would like to have this relationship with Jesus, if you would like to know him as I know him, please come down. And all these people started coming down. I mean, scores of people from our own community came rushing down because they wanted to be like these guys. Now, I'm sure that there were some people who were truly transformed that night, who truly entered into a relationship with Christ. But there are a bunch of other people who saw other people coming forward. They thought that was a cool thing to do, so they went forward too. And then the next day they got up and they said, whoa, that was weird. And that was the end of it. The sad thing is that my concern is that some of those people now say, I don't have to worry about this Jesus thing. I said a prayer once. I was at this meeting and I went forward and I said a prayer. Jesus, heaven thing, checked off the list. I don't have to worry about it anymore. I didn't really get it. God doesn't want us to do that with Easter. He doesn't want us to come away saying, I worshiped Christ on Easter. Boy, I had a good feeling. There was even a tear in my eye. I must be a true believer. He doesn't want us to be moved by the event. He wants us to be moved by the facts. Listen to these words from Tim Keller. Keller got it right here. He writes, all other kinds of religions always say, here is a way you can live better. Here is a way to wisdom. Here's a way to deal with your problems. Here's the way to relate to God. Here's the way to come into unity with the infinite. It's soft news. Christianity alone, of all the world religions up to then and even today, comes in with hard news. It's something that actually happened. Christianity, at its core, is not a philosophy. It's not a theory on how to live a better life. The Christian faith is about facts. It deals with historical happenings. Jesus, a real man, lived at a real time, did the things that the witnesses said he did, was killed because he was seen as a subversive effect on society, and 3 days later, he came back from the dead. Witnesses saw him. It's about facts. The challenge for us is to understand that this is about facts. This isn't about an event. So here's some questions that we need to ask ourselves. Number one, do I believe these things are true? And if you're not sure, Are you willing to examine the facts? Are you willing to listen to the testimony of the people who were there? Second, if these things are true, then what does this tell me about Jesus? Then who is this Jesus guy if he really came back from the dead? If nothing else, he's unique. Is it possible that he was who he said he was? He was one that was sent by God, who was co-equal and co-eternal with God, who had come to take our place. Third, if he was who he said he was, are you willing to entrust yourself to him? Are you willing to run into his open arms? Are you willing to say, yes, thank you, I want what you are offering to me? Fourth, if you do turn to him, what implications will that have for the way you live your life? If Jesus really is the Lord, if Jesus really is the King, then that should have some impact on the way that you live your life. We can't just pick and choose. We can't say, well, I'll serve you here, but not here. I'll do this, but I won't do that. If he's the king, then he has authority, and we have given him authority by coming to him. And finally, we need to ask ourselves, since Jesus shows that there's life beyond the grave, how does this change my priorities in life? How does this change my values? How does this change my outlook? How does this change the way I grow old? Do I grow old and say, oh, pretty soon I'm going to die? Or do we say, pretty soon I'm going home? Pretty soon I'm going to be with Jesus. Pretty soon I get to graduate. Those are important questions for us to ask. Now we need to understand that other religions tell us that we should just take their word for things. Joseph Smith said, okay, this angel appeared to me, I was given these golden plates, and then I was given this glass so that I could read the golden plates, and I dictated them to these people on the other side of this sheet, and we had the Book of Mormon, and then the plates were gone, and the angel was gone, and we say, well, how do we know that this is true? And Joseph says, we just have to trust me. Muhammad wrote down all his revelations from God and said that God had revealed to him that he was a prophet, the prophet, the top prophet. And this was a new way to do things. And we say, well, how do we know that that's true? You just have to trust me. Doesn't that sound a little bit like those telemarketers who call you? And they say, you've won a free trip to the Bahamas. Really? Yes! How much is it going to cost you? Nothing. It doesn't cost you anything. It is absolutely free. Don't you believe me? No. Just trust me. Yeah. And then the next thing, once you trust him, you know what they ask you for? Your credit card. Christianity doesn't do that. Paul in 1 Corinthians 15, he says, look, Jesus arose. He appeared to this guy, this guy, this guy, this guy. He appeared to over 500 people at one time, most of whom who are still alive. You know what Peter's saying, what Paul is saying? Go talk to them. If you don't believe me, verify the facts. Go check it out. And by the way, last of all, he appeared to me. I'm telling you what I've personally experienced. I have seen him. Christianity's different. It's about facts, not about an event. So what do? Two conclusions I want to give you. The first is this. I think if you're going to really celebrate Easter this year, you need to make some time for quiet. Ponder what this day is. Allow the holiness of this great moment to overwhelm you. To have that experience like I had when I walked into that cathedral in Cologne. You see what Jesus has done and just say, oh, it's amazing. The resurrection teaches us that Jesus is unlike any person we know. His sacrifice of love was accepted on God's behalf, on our behalf by God. It tells us that this life is not all there is. Think about it. Let it sink in. Take it personally. And second, on this day we need to respond with faith to the offer of forgiveness and new life. Refuse to see Easter merely as a historical event. This is a historical event that has incredible personal implications. Take it personally. If Jesus did indeed rise from the dead, then he is worth following with every ounce of strength that we have. Search your heart. Are you here today to celebrate a holiday or to worship, follow, and trust the one who is risen from the dead? You may be here for a bunch of different reasons. You may be here because this is part of your family tradition. You may be here because somebody made you come. You know, your spouse said, yeah, at least you can come to church with me on Easter. Maybe you're here because you're curious. Maybe this is what you've always done on Easter. It's a family thing you do. The question is, are you encountering the facts? Don't just come to Easter. Come to Jesus. He came to earth to do for us what we could not do for ourselves. He came to make us right with God. His death was a payment for our sin. He suffered in our place. His resurrection is a declaration. The payment is satisfactory. It's good. It's pleasing. Come to him. Come to him to make you new. God has reached out to you and to me. The next move is ours. So here are the facts. Welcome the good news. Turn to the Savior who has risen with every ounce of strength that you have. Let the reality of that quiet Easter morning change your life and your destiny forever. The facts are true. Doesn't matter whether it's announced with trumpets or with whispers. If you embrace the reality of those facts, it will change your life forever, just like it's changed mine. Let's pray together. Father, I suspect that there are people here today who are here just for the event. Open their eyes. Flip the switch so that they understand. Help them to see that this is about more than church. It's about life. It's about forgiveness. It's about meaning, purpose. It's about being loved. For all of us, Father, open our eyes wide so that we might see, that we might comprehend to the best of our ability that you are an awesome God who has loved us in a way that we can't even begin to understand. So help us to leave behind our insecurities, to leave behind our feelings of worthlessness because of failure or struggle. Help us to entrust to you the bruises and the hurts of our lives and the effects of our sin. Help us to leave with you the guilt and instead to walk away holding your hand as part of your family, walking towards life here that's wonderful and in the future that's even better yet. Help us to this end, we ask in Jesus' wonderful name. Amen.